How you doing there? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Chav Zayin, Daf 27 of Masechta Nazir, friends. Today we're studying, we're going weiter on like this whole like specified, unspecified funds kind of stuff. So, exciting stuff. We're going to start on Daf Chav Vav Amud Beis, about 8 lines from the bottom or so, maybe 7. So Shimi Bar Ashi says to Papa, "My tamau de Rabbanon." What's the reason the rabbis? Which rabbis? Well, if we back up about 10 lines or so, right? So if we back up about 10 lines or so, it says, Amar Funo Amar Rav Lo Shono Ela Maos, that we're only talking about money. That money that is unspecified, so then it could be, goes to the Kayetz HaMizbeach, L'Nedova. Aval Behema Arehuk Miforeshes. But if you have an animal, it's not considered unspecified, it's considered specified, right? Amar of Nachman Adami Behema Arei K'Meforeshes Loshon Elastuma Aval Naska Lo. Rav Nachman Yitzchak Amar Afilu Naska Afilu Svar Shel Koros Lo. So we saw these different opinions of the rabbis about different things that would be considered specified funds, and specified funds basically you wouldn't be able to use them, right? So we talked about ingots and things. So like an ingot, you would have to basically just destroy it. You wouldn't be able to use it for Kayetz HaMizbeach or anything. So I'm going to Rav Shimon Bar Ashi, Rav Papa, it says Rav Shimon Bar Ashi to Rav Papa, my Tamar D'Rabbanan, what's the rationale for the rabbis? How come the rabbis say that only money would be considered unspecified funds, but these other things would be considered specified funds, would be unusable for the Kayetz HaMizbeach? Dami Mos v'lo behema v'lo naska. Mos v'lo svar. Well, because we're talking about money. We're not talking about animals. We're not talking about ingots. We're not talking about beams. But effective Gemara, effective Shimi Bar Ashi. Well, if that's the case, Elamiata Mos v'lo ofis. Ho 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 ho. Ho ho ho. Well, if that's the case, then we should say money and not birds. That if you have birds, they would be considered specified, and let's go weiter. And if you'd say that birds would be considered specified, but we have a kasha. There's light reflecting off of this book, this sefer that I have here. What should I do? Maybe this. That should help. Okay. This will help even more. That's geschmack. So listen to this. So what about that which Rav Chizda says? In akinin misparshos eli b'likichas bailim ibasias koyin. Ho 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 ho. That if you have a pair of birds, right? So let's say you have a woman who gave birth, and she needs to bring a pair of birds, and she's bringing a pair of birds for korbanos. One is a chatas, one is an ola. So we don't. How about this? The determination of which bird is the chatas and which bird is the ola is either up to the women bringing the bird sacrifices, the korban yoledis, or the priest who's actually offering the birds. So now, but amai hamos gemirin lo, but if but if that's true, asks Rav Shimi Bar Ashi to Rav Papa, if it's true that it's ma'os v'lo ofis, that only money would be considered unspecified, but birds would be considered specified. Well, if that's the case, that these birds are considered specified, well then how can the kohen be deciding which one's the ola and which one is the chatas if they're already considered specified? Then how, right? If they're pre-specified, so to speak, then how could the kohen be deciding which one's the ola, which one's the chatas? Maybe he's getting it wrong. In order for him to be able to determine which one's the ola, which one's the chatas, it must be that they're unspecified, like money, and therefore the kohen can himself specify which one's the ola and which one is the chatos. So Omarle, wait, so 1 second. So Hamos community, right? So meaning you, right? Meaning if we're saying that it means only money is considered unspecified, but the birds would be considered specified, so then how can the Kohen determine? Omar Le, to which Rav Papa responds to Rav Shimi bar Ashi, Ule Taimech, but according to you, Rav Shimi bar Ashi. So Rav Shimi bar Ashi, what do you want to happen, Rav Shimi bar Ashi? So you want to say that it means that the birds would be considered unspecified, and it would follow also that any animals would also be considered unspecified? Well, if that's the case, so it's not that which we learn in a Mishnah. Rav Shimon ben Gamliel says, Rav Shimon ben Gamliel, Hevi shalish behemis. If you have a Nazir and he brings 3 animals, velo perish, and he didn't explain which one is the chatus, which one is the ola, and which one is the shlomim. He has 3 animals and then he dies. And now what do we do with these animals? Haru'uy l'chatus tikrav chatus. Well, the one that is fit to be a chatus is offered as a chatus. La'ola tikrav ola, l'shlomim tikrav shlomim. The one that is fit to be an ola is brought as an ola. The one that is fit to be a shlomim is brought as a shlomim. Now, a chatus needs to be a female lamb. An ola would be a male lamb, and a shlomim would be a ram. Okay, so we're saying, right, haru'uy l'chatus, the female lamb would be a chatus, tikrav chatus. The ola tikrav ola, the male lamb would be offered as the ola, the shlomim, and the ram would be offered as a shlomim. Right, I think a ram is a 3-year-old sheep, I think, and a lamb would be less than that, I think, or maybe first year, I think. But a ram is an older sheep, male sheep. Amai, ha'amad be'emelav k'meforeshes dami, but you, Rav Shimi bar Ashi, wouldn't you say that the animals would be considered unspecified? And if they're unspecified, then why would you be offering them as korbanos? So, Omar Le, Rav Shimi bar Ashi responds to Rav Papa and he says, Meh. Hosam v'lokach ve'osa omer achmano, I b'lekichas bailim, I b'asiyas koyin. He says, look, when it comes to the birds, the reason why the kohen would be able to offer them and determine which one is the chatas and which one is the ola is because the pasuk says, "V'lokach v'asa," he'll take it and he'll make it. Ibilikichas bailim, and that could and that could be determined either by the owner, ibasiyas kohen, or by the priest who's offering the korbanis. Either one can determine it. Hachanami, and says Shimon bar Ashi, we could say the same thing here by the animals. Mimotis omart hadin the chatis tikav ola hachanekeva chazacher. That right when it comes to the Nazir, as I explained a minute ago, there are different qualifications for what's the chatas, what's the ola, and what's the shlomim. Right, as we just said. Mimotis omart hadin the chatis tikav ola. Can it enter your mind to say that the chatas should be offered as the ola? The chatas is a nekeva, the ola is a zacher. So memele, even if the animals were unspecified, so even if the animals were unspecified, we obviously know which one's the chatas, which one's the ola, which one is the shlamim, because the chatas is the nekeva, the ola is the zacher, and the shlamim is the ayil, is the ram. So therefore Shimon bar Ashi says, look, I mean, it's, even if they are unspecified, we still know memele which one is which. Mosiv Rav Hamnuna. Rav Hamnuna asks a kasha. Umi aminon behema bailas mum kisesuma damya. Do we really say that a animal that has a mum is considered like unspecified, right? We had said on yesterday's daf that if you have an animal with a mum, so then it's considered unspecified, and it can be sold, and the value would go to the nadav, would go to the kaitz mizbech. So now tashma, but come and hear. So actually, there's actually an entirely different girsa of this. I think it's a Mishnah. But we have an entirely different girsa than what appears in our Gemara. So I will read it with that girsa, if I can find it. Okay. So Ketzad Amar Ish Megaleach Al Nazir Aviv. How do they say that, right, if you have a child who's a Nazir and he wants to utilize the korbanis from his father who was a Nazir, so Ketzad Amru Ha'ish Megaleach Al Nazir Aviv, how do they say that a fellow can use the korbanos of his father who was a Nazir? Bizman Aviv Nazir. Well, it's talking about when his father was a Nazir. The son was not a Nazir, the father was a Nazir. And the father had set aside money that he was going to use to purchase his korbanis at the end of his Naziris. But then the father died. At which point the son says, Hareini Nazir, I am going to be a Nazirite Amanas under the condition Shagaleach Amos Abba, that I will, at the end of my Naziris, I will use the money that my father had set aside for his korbanos. I will use that money for my own korbanos at the end of my Naziris. So in that case, he can use his father's money that his father had set aside for his own korbanos, and the son can use that money, those funds, for his own korbanos at the end of his Naziris. Avo, however, but if his father, if he himself and his father were Nazirs at the same time, and his father had set aside money, so and it was unspecified money, and then he dies, and the son says, I am going to use my father's money for my own korbanis. Yiplu l'nedava. No way. They are going to. They have to be donated to Beis Hamikdash for the Kayetz HaMizbech. Hoysulo beim mufreshes. If he had specified animals, chatas tomus, the korban chatas needs to die. Ola, the ola, tik of ola the ola can be offered as in ola ushlamim yikuv ushlamim, and the shlamim can be offered as a shlamim. Okay, now back to our Gemara. My love, afilu bailas mum. So what do we see? So we see that even these animals, if it has a mum, right? Meaning all it said is aisulo beim mufreshes. If he had animals that he had set aside, so it seems to be regardless of if it had a mum or not. And even if it has a mum, it's considered specified, not unspecified. Lo tamima. No, it's talking about where the animals were healthy, and because the animals were healthy, unblemished, so that is why they're being, the chatas has to die, the ola and shlamim are offered as korbanos. Ava bailas mum kisesuma damya. But are we then saying though that if it has a mum, then it would be considered like it's unspecified, but then my area mos? But if it's considered unspecified, then why did we only say specifically that by the money? If we have unspecified money, then it goes linedava. Lema haisulo behema bailas mum yet linedava. Say also, right, you could have said that if you have an animal that has a mum, it, you sell it and the money goes linedava for the Kayetz HaMizbeach. So why, if that's the case, that an animal that has a mum is linedava, so then why did it was a brisa, it's a Mishnah. Why did it say specifically that, I guess a brisa, that the money is linedava? You could have also said that if you have animals that had a mum. So, and for the Gemara, ochinami, sure, but by las mum lemay kodisha lidmei ainumos. At the end of the day, though, an animal that has a mum, you'd have to sell for money, and then the money will go linedava. So at the end of the day, we're talking about money. So you mentioned money. We didn't mention the animal with the mum, because ultimately the animal with the mum, you sell, you get the money, and you donate that. So ultimately it's money, so we just mentioned the money. Okay. Now friends, now we have a super duper long brisa that's basically going to take us all the way till like the Mishnah toward like 3/4 of the way through Ches Amud Aleph. So friends, I think we're just gonna go for it, friends. We're just gonna go for it, and that means that tomorrow's daf is gonna be super short. Masiv Rove asks a kasha. Korbanoi. The pasuk says korbanoi. Bekorbanoi hu yotzev and yotzev bekorban aviv. So it says the pasuk says korbano, his korban. He's got to use his own korban. He can't use his father's korban. Yachol lo yetze bekorbano shel aviv shehifrish min hakala ala chamura u'min hachmura ala kala. Is it possible that, you know, if your father had a korban chatas, right? So we're saying, right? It says in the context of korban chatas, although this is specifically, I guess, by a chatas of a you know, like a king, but okay. But we're saying by a korban chatas, right? So it says korban, it has to be his korban chatas. Can't use his father's korban chatas. Yachol lo yetzi b'korbano shel aviv she'efish min hakala al chamura min hachmura al kala. What does that mean? What's an example of a kala? What's an example of a more lenient korban chatas as opposed to a more strict, stricter, more stringent korban chatas? A more lenient korban chatas is, for example, if you eat chaylev. Chaylev is something that you're not chayiv misas bezdin, right? There's no capital punishment for eating chaylev. I believe you're chayiv karis, but you don't get capital punishment. And if you eat it by accident, you bring a korban chatas. So that would be considered a more lenient korban chatas, because it's not something that right, eating chaylev is not something that has misas bezdin associated with it, as opposed to chilul Shabbos, for example. Chilul Shabbos is something that has skila, misas bezdin. So if you mechal Shabbos by accident, so you bring a korban chatas, that would be considered a korban chatas that's more stringent, because it's connected to an avera that has skila, misas bezdin. So yachol lo yetze b'korbano shel aviv shefish min hakala min hachmura lakala. So maybe I might think, okay, I can't use my father's korban chatos if he was mechal Shabbos and I ate chaylev, or fakert, he ate chaylev and I was mechal Shabbos. Aval yotze b'korban shefish aviv min hakala lakala min hachmura lachamura. But I might think that if he had eaten chaylev and I ate chaylev, maybe I could use his korban. Or if he was mechal Shabbos and I was mechal Shabbos, maybe I could use his korban. Talmud lomar korbanoi. Therefore it says nachamal korbanoi. It says korbanoi twice. Bekorbanoi yotze v'en yotze bekorbanoi shel aviv. No, he's got to use his own korban. He can't use his father's korban. Yachol lo yetze bekorban aviv bibehema shefish afilu min hakala ala kala min hachmura ala chamura. Right, but maybe what we just said, that's limited to animals. I can't use my father's animal, even if, we both ate chaylev, or we both were mechal Shabbos, we both did the same thing, still, I can't use his animal. Because after all, a fellow cannot use his father's animal, benazirus. So, aval, yotze, b'mos shifrish of it, but maybe if his father had set aside money for a korban chatos, afilu min aval yotze b'mos shifrish aviv afilu min hachamura ala kala min hakala ala chamura. But I might think that if my father had set aside money for a korban chatos, right, and so then I should be able to use that money, even if he set aside money for having been mechal Shabbos and I ate chaylev, or fakert, he ate chaylev and I was mechal Shabbos. Maybe I could use that money. Because a fellow can use his father's money by naziris in order to purchase the animals. Bizman shein stumen, as long as they are unspecified. But not if they are specified. Tamlomer korbano, therefore it says by echata, it says korbano, b'korbano yotze, it says nacham, what's this a third time? Korbano, b'korbano yotze, and yotze b'korban aviv, that he's got to use his own korban, not his father's, and therefore that's even money. He cannot use his father's money. Fine. B'korbanu yotze and yotze b'korban aviv. Yachol lo yetze b'mos sheifresh afilu min hakala sheifresh aviv afilu min hakala ala kala min hachamura ala chamura. So I might think, okay, fine. So I can't use my father's animals. I can't use my father's money. Aval yotze b'korban sheifresh la'atzmo. But maybe he might think that, right, if the son thinks that he had set aside for himself a korban, because I don't know, he was Michal Shabbos or something, so he set aside himself a korban. That, if he was Michal Shabbos and he set aside a korban for the Chil Shabbos, but then he ate chaylev, so maybe he'll think that he could use, he himself had set aside the korban, so maybe he could swap him. Tamlomer korbanu al chataso. It says his korban for his sin, ad sheyeh korbanu l'shum cheto. His korban needs to be for the sin that he did, and if he sets it aside for Chil Shabbos, he can't use it for chaylev. Yochel lo yoytze bebehema she'efish la'atzmo min akala ala kala or min achamura ala chamura. Right, so I might think that, okay, fine, so I can't use an animal that I've set aside for myself. Min akala ala kala, or min achamura ala chamura, min akala ala chamura, or min achamura ala kala. Okay, so I might think that I can't use an animal that I set aside, whether it's for, an interchangeable thing, right? Kala ala kala, chamura ala chamura, or whether it's chamura ala kala, kala ala chamura, whatever it is. Shekenim hifish behema ala chaylev, ve'evi ala dam, because after all, if a fellow set aside an animal for chaylev, vehevi al adam, and then he actually offered it for having eaten blood. Or if he had set aside a animal for having consumed blood, and then he brought it for having consumed chaylev. Sharei lo mo'al v'lo kiper. In that case, there's no me'ilah. And if he offers it, there's no kapara. But I might think, but maybe I'll say that if he set aside money for himself, minakala likala or minachamura lachamura, for two lenient korbanos or two stringent korbanos, minachamura likala or minakala lachamura, or for stringent and lenient stringent. Shekenim hifish la'atzmo maos. Because if a fellow had set aside money for a korban for having consumed the chaylev, but then he purchased and offered for a korban for having consumed blood, or if it was he set aside money for having consumed blood and then offered it for chaylev, there is me'ilah and there would be kapara. So I might think that he should be able to use money that he had set aside for one chatas and use it for another chatas. Tamloma al chataso hache korban l'shem chataso. No, he has to set aside the money for that chatas. So if he set aside money for chaylev, he has to use it for a korban for chaylev. All right, that is that brisa. That's a super long brisa. Katoni mias behema. No, but where early on in the brisa we had mentioned that a son cannot use his father's animal. My love afilu bailas mum. So we want to say that even if it had a mum, he would not be able to use it. Even if it was even if it had a mum, it would still be considered specified and unusable, not unspecified. Lo tamima, we say no, it's specifically an unblemished animal. But what if it had a mum? It would be considered unspecified. Well, if that's the case, that it's unspecified, then why did we specifically mention that you could use your father's unspecified money? But what about an animal that has a mum is also considered unspecified. So we say yes, but at the end of the day, the animal you would have to sell and get its value. So because ultimately we're talking about money, that's why we mentioned money. Even though yes, it could have technically said an animal that has a mum. All right, that was super exciting. And that was the Chav Zayin of Masechta Nazir. I hope you enjoyed. Peace out.